Hi, welcome to IDT 150 Computer Modeling with Autodesk Alias 2013. I'm your instructor, Josh Haldeman. Today we'll be learning to create and manipulate primitives by modeling the red-blue chair designed in 1917 by Rietveld. In order to get started with this project, the first thing you need to do is go to a browser and go to cincinnati-state.edu. At the top of this site, go to My C State and log in. Once you've logged in, you should get this page. Click on the computer modeling course and then navigate over to the assignments tab that's on the left side of your page. When you come in here, you'll notice that there are three icons here: the Project 1 description, videos, and Week 1 Red Blue Chair by Rietveld. When you click on the Rietveld folder, you'll be presented with three files. The red blue chair instructions that are at the top, those are the steps that we're following in this video today. Next, you'll see the red blue chair wire file. This is the file that you start with. And then you'll see a file that has the complete chair included in it. That's just for reference so that you can see how it came out. You want to download, at the very minimum, this file in the middle here called chair.wire. Right-click on it, choose Save Link As, and I'd recommend that you create a folder on your desktop to save this stuff out to. And you can do that by creating a new folder here. I'd suggest putting your name on it, and then going ahead and saving that file there. Next, once the file is downloaded, go into Alias, go to File, and choose Open. Navigate to that folder on your desktop, and you should see a file in there called Chair. Before we go ahead and open this, I want to point out these two boxes up at the top. There's one called Go and one called Project. In the Project drop-down, you'll see that there's an option for setting this folder as the current project folder. By doing this and hitting OK to confirm, your program will automatically navigate back to this location anytime you want to open a new file or save the current file or open a different file from this location. Once we have this chair selected, double-click it to open it. The first thing you'll see is this confirmation screen, which asks you if you want to delete all the objects, shaders, views, and actions before opening this file. Hit Yes here. It's not going to remove your files, it's just going to close them. Alias only opens one file at a time. When you open the file, you'll see four screens here: the top view, the perspective view, or also known as camera view, the left or front view, and the back or right view. The top, front, and right views are all populated with pictures of the chair. These are used for reference purposes and allow you to help you to coordinate the construction of the model. In order to get started, what I want to do is I want to make these canvas planes inactive. That way they're still visible, but I don't accidentally move them, and therefore making it harder to make the object the correct size. In order to do this, I have to have a layer. So the first step is to go to the Layers drop-down menu at the top and choose New. This gives you a new layer in this location, and you can then assign the canvas planes to that layer. So go to the Pick menu on the palette, choose Nothing, pick Nothing, and then pick Object. In the top view, drag a box around all three views, all three of the canvas planes here. I'm doing this using my left mouse button. That highlights all three. You can see they turn white when they're selected. And I can then assign those to Layer 1 by left-clicking on Layer 1, going down to where it says Assign, and then picking that option. The next step, in order to make them inactive, is to go to Layer 1 menu again. Again, left-click and hold on that menu until the options come up. Choose Set State and make those make those canvas planes inactive. You can see that the pictures don't disappear, but I can now no longer select them. This keeps me from accidentally moving one or the others. Okay, so what exactly is a primitive? Well, if you come over to the palette, which is on your left-hand side of your screen and includes all the tools that you'll use in this program, and scroll down to the menu that's called Surfaces, you'll notice that the first tool there, which looks like the sphere tool, has a little yellow arrow next to it. Anytime you see a tool that has this little yellow arrow, it means there are other tools under that tool that are closely associated with it. In this case, it's all the primitive shapes. Go ahead, in order to access all of the tools, go ahead and click and hold with your left mouse button on that tool, and it'll pop open all of the primitive shapes that are available to you. These include the sphere, the torus, the cylinder, the cone, the cube, and the plane. What I'd like you to do is go into this menu and pick the cube tool. What this will do is it'll allow you to be able to create the primitive cubes, which is the shape that all of the objects in the Rietveld chair are made from. The next step, in order to place the cube into our scene, we need to be able to see our geometry a little bit more clearly. So I'm going to go to the top of the right view here, and you can notice at the very top on the very far right-hand corner of the window, you have a tool that looks like a box inside of another box. Click that icon, and it will maximize that window. In order to zoom in, you need to use a keyboard shortcut. There are some zoom tools up here, but I would recommend using the keyboard shortcuts because you have a little bit more accuracy that way. Hold down Shift and Alternate on your keyboard and use your right mouse button to zoom on your screen. You can also use your middle mouse button, this would be the scroll wheel, to pan around your view. Those two together allow you to be able to maneuver and manipulate the window and move around it. Now, in order to place the first cube into our scene to be able to manipulate it, I'm going to just choose a particular location. In this case, it's the top of the front chair leg. That's right there. Now, when you initially place the cube into your scene, you get this little manipulation icon here. I'll cover that a little later on, but for now, that's how you know you've placed an object into your scene. Only click once. Don't click more than one time or you'll place more than one object into your scene. The next step then is to go up to the top of the palette to the Transform menu. In here, you can go in, click on the Scale tool, which is on the top row, third tool over on the right, and enter a scale for the cube that you've just put into your scene. The reason you can't see any cube shapes is because it's too big. It's larger than our window. If you zoom out, you'll be able to see it, but it's really, really big. So Alias just kind of does that. You'll get used to it eventually. So in order to be able to see the object so that we can determine if we've got it sized correctly, what we need to do is we need to take the size down to, let's try 1. So I'm just going to enter 1. Don't worry about the units yet. And then go ahead and hit Enter. When we do this, we get the cube. It's smaller, but it's not small enough. But we can now see it, so we can tell if we're making it bigger or smaller. You can also tell that the cube is picked because it's white. So if I go and I still have my scale tool selected over here, and I click my left mouse button, what that'll do is it'll scale that cube down in all 3 directions. So I can now make it so that it's the same width as that chair leg. Now I can also adjust just the height or just the width. I could do that using the other 2 mouse buttons. So for instance, if I wanted to change the height, I would use the right mouse button, and that'll move it up and down. Notice that it pivots or moves around the pivot point. You can also make it wider by using the middle mouse button. Again, that's the scroll wheel, and that will allow you to move it in and out. Now let's say that I don't want to move it up or down according to where the pivot point currently is. What if I want to move the pivot point so that it's in the corner of an object? That way when I scale it, it scales from that corner. You can do that using Alias by using the Set Pivot tool. That's located also under the Transform menu over on the right. Over on the left. It's the second row, third tool over on the right, called Set Pivot. What this does is it allows you to pick the pivot point, which is that little greenish colored dot in the middle of the, or a square in the middle of your shape, and move it anywhere else. And all you have to do to move this is just basically click anywhere, and it'll follow your mouse around wherever you click. If you want to snap it to something, you can try and get it pretty close. You can sort of identify that it's about there, but I would not recommend that, because if it's microscopically off, which it almost invariably is, it will cause problems later on when you're trying to get objects to be exactly in the same spot. So what I'd suggest you do instead is introduce yourself to the snap tools. The snap tools are in the upper right-hand corner of your window, and there are 3 of them. There's the Snap to CV Edit Point tool, which looks like a little magnet next to a circle. There's the Snap to Grid, which looks like a magnet on top of a grid. And then there's the Snap to Curve. Snap to Curve is a little an orthodox name for this because it's not just curves you're snapping to, it's also surfaces. So, but that is the one that we want. So if you click that tool and then just hover over the top of the top of that box and then click with your left mouse button, you'll notice that when you click, it snaps to the line, and you can drag that point. If you keep your left mouse button clicked down, you can drag to either one side or the other. When you're on the very edge there, you'll notice that the indicators, those little blue lines, will turn yellow to indicate that you're on that edge. Now that I've got that pivot point in that location, what I can do is I can move my object, and again, the mouse buttons work the same way. The left mouse button moves it in any direction at any given point in time. Undo that. The middle mouse button moves it just left and right. Let me undo that again. And then the right mouse button moves it just up and down. So if I want to constrain the movement so that I get a more precise placement, then I'm going to choose to move it just up and down, and then move it so that the top of that cube is aligned with the top of the leg. Now I can scale this object to make it so that it's taller. And when it scales this time, again using the right mouse button, notice that it will scale based around where the pivot point currently is. So now I can make it so that it's long enough. Now, this is a point in time that you need to be able to remember to ask yourself, am I done? Have I fully defined the shape of this particular object? It's now the correct height and the correct width. But remember, in real world, all objects have 3 dimensions. So in any one viewport, either the top, the front, or the right side view, at any given time, you're only manipulating 2 of those directions. So you always have to check your objects in the other views to make sure that you're scaling and locating the parts correctly. In this case, the part does appear to be the correct size, but it's not in the correct location. If we go to our front view, we can kind of see where we need to go. And again, I'll switch to my Move tool here. I don't want a curve snap, so I can shut that one off. And I can use my middle mouse button to constrain the movement just left and right by dragging to the left or to the right. Now, I can't quite see where the top of that frontal leg is, but I can see where the bottom is, so I can align it based around that. Once I have this first leg in there and it's now fully defined, we can use that. We can actually copy that shape to create the other shapes that form the side of the chair. This makes it incredibly easy to create and manipulate objects in this program, because you can do these shortcuts like creating a copy of something that's already pretty much the right shape instead of having to create it again all the way from scratch. So before we do that, always remember to save your file. This is a good point to save because we've got one complete shape in there. So go to File, choose Save As. Don't do Save because it'll overwrite the original file. And what I usually suggest my students do is add their name to it. And I would suggest both your first and your last name in case anybody else in the class has the same name as you. Then go ahead and hit hit the Save button. Now the file's saved. Now we can move on to copying that object. In order to copy an object in an alias, there are a couple of different ways to do it. I'm going to cover the easiest one, the one that's probably the most like what you might find in another piece of software. The steps are to go to the Edit menu at the top and choose Copy. Then go to the Edit menu again and choose Paste. This is a little confusing, and at this point, I would make sure that you don't keep hitting Paste. The reason being is that it's pasted the copy of the object directly over the top of the original, so you can't see it, and it's also now selected the copy. There's no way to know that you have two copies of the object unless you try and pick them. So, for instance, if I go up to the Pick menu and I choose Pick Nothing, then I choose Pick Object, I can now go down and hover over any of the lines, the outside lines of that cube, and I can pick them. And when I do, I get two options. In this case, the objects are identical, so it doesn't matter which one I pick. But you notice that I have them named Cube, which is that guy, and Cube number 2, which is this guy. And like I said, in this case, they're identical, so they're exactly the same. Choose Cube number 2, just for consistency's sake. And then go down to your Transform menu and choose Move. When you move an object, it's important to click off of that object when you're going to move it. If you click on the object, it thinks you might want to pick that object or possibly the other object that's below it. And it'll get a little confused. It'll pop up that menu again. And it can sometimes be a little frustrating doing that. So the way to avoid it is once you have the object picked, just use the Move tool to select it and click anywhere besides where there are objects in your scene. This will ensure that you're moving the selected object and nothing else. If that's confusing, think about it this way. That's the reason why you have both a Pick tool and a Move tool. It's to help you to kind of break down those tasks and make it a little bit easier to pick and move the correct objects. Now that I have this second copy of the front chair leg moved to the back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it so that it's the correct length for the back leg. If I choose the Scale tool, again, remember, I want to scale just vertically, so I'm using my right mouse button, and I'm scaling it down to the very bottom there. And again, I'm trying to be as precise as possible, but my reference image isn't very precise itself, so it's an approximation. We understand that. We realize that the point of this exercise is really to learn how to create primitives and manipulate them. It's not precision, so don't worry about it too much if it looks like it's a little off. We could do this copy and paste again to do the support for the armrest and also for the lateral support on the bottom of the chair. As well as the armrest itself. And for the armrest itself and that lateral support on the bottom, we're going to need to copy and paste the objects as well as rotate them. So I'll cover that, and there's a little bit of a tricky part to doing that part in the next step. Okay, so let's move this object. Let's copy and move this object over to this side. Go to the Edit menu, choose Copy, and Paste again. Again, remember, this copies and pastes the object and puts it right directly on top of the other one. So don't freak out. Don't think that it's not doing what it's supposed to. It is. It's just hard to see. Make sure under the Transform menu that you're on the Move tool. When you select that, you can now move anywhere in your scene with that object simply by clicking in space. I'm trying to place my objects so that my pivot point is somewhere where it makes sense. That way I can scale it to that pivot point. So in this case, I moved it up to just under the armrest so that I can then go in and I can scale it up and down. Remember, the up and down scaling is your right mouse button. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is here in a minute, but this will get us started. Okay, so now I've got my front leg, my back leg, and this armrest support. The next thing I want to do is I want to create this lateral support beam at the bottom and the armrest itself. So I'm going to go to Edit, Copy, and Paste again. But let me show you a shortcut here. Instead of copying and pasting all the time, which can get a little tedious, you have to click twice, they created an additional tool here called Duplicate Object. This one, you only have to click once, so it saves you a mouse click. If you go to Edit, Duplicate, and choose Object, it copies that object, does exactly the same thing as it did before, but now I didn't have to hit Copy and Paste. Now, when I go to Move, I can go down and I can place this guy over here in the corner. Remember, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do here, so I'm placing the pivot point in the corner of where the lateral support needs to be. Then I can rotate up that beam, and I need to figure out what to rotate about. This can be a little tricky unless you use this icon in the corner as a guide for what you need to do. For instance, notice that in this view, you're looking at your Z-axis vertically and your Y-axis horizontally. That means your X-axis is pointing right at you. Your X-axis should be thought of as your left mouse button. Your Y-axis should be thought of as your middle mouse button, and your Z-axis should be thought of as your right mouse button in most instances. If I use my left mouse button in this case here, it'll rotate the object in the correct orientation. If I don't, it'll rotate that object into a different view and or a different axis, and that will cause some problems. So always make sure that you check your icon, your indicator here in the corner, to tell you if you're in the right orientation or not. The next thing I need to do is I need to scale this thing up, and then I also need to make it a little shorter. Now this part gets a little confusing because remember what I was telling you before about these three parts here where I said scaling vertically is always the right mouse button. Here's the exception to that rule. If you've rotated an object, you've also rotated that object's axes. So if I now try to adjust the object's height, which should be the vertical adjustment, watch what happens. I'm using my right mouse button now. See how it's getting shorter and longer lengthwise? It's because it's still the same axis as it was, but now it's rotated almost 90 degrees. So just be aware of that. It can get a little confusing, and I can show you how to reset the axes for any given object so that it's back to normal. But it actually can be kind of useful in this case because when the axes rotate with the object, that means that they don't distort if they're at weird angles. So it can be really, really helpful. Now this lateral support beam, it looks like it's a little bit too tall. So in order to adjust its height, remember it's rotated, I need to adjust the horizontal adjustment for scaling, which in this case is the middle mouse button. So to do this, now it adjusts the height, and that just allows me to make it the correct height for that part. Keep in mind, for all of these objects, that we've only so far been adjusting things in 2 dimensions. So we're only moving them on the Y and the Z axes. If I need to see where something is on the X-axis, then I need to change my view. And in this case, I do because that lateral support beam doesn't cover up over the top of those 3 parts. It covers all 3. It goes behind all 3 axes. To do this, I'm going to switch to the front view again. And here I can see where that lateral support beam falls. So I'm going to choose the Move tool, and I'm just going to simply move it over using my middle mouse button. That constrains the movement again to adjust my X-axis. Again, notice your indicator in the corner. In the front view, your indicators are the Z-axis and the X-axis. Now I'm going to go back to the right side view because all the armrest, the back leg, and the front leg are all aligned, so they were all where they needed to be. And what I'm going to do is with this now rotated object is I'm going to copy it and use it to create my armrest. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Duplicate Object again, and then I'm going to move that copy up to the corner where the armrest starts. Now I'm going to scale it all down. Now in this case, I need to scale a little bit vertically and a lot horizontally. But remember, this is a copy of the object that was rotated, so its axes are still aligned with the object, meaning that if I use my right mouse button, it adjusts the length, and if I use my middle mouse button, it adjusts the height. If I use my left mouse button, it'll adjust all 3 axes together, but that's how I adjust the height and the width. Now that's, again, just the Z and the Y adjustments. The X adjustment needs to be separate. You can see where the pivot point is in this view. So move your object accordingly to the edge of the armrest, and then scale it up again. And you'll see that one way goes one way, I'm using my middle mouse button. If I go one direction with it, it'll make it bigger. If I go the other direction with it, it'll make it smaller. Okay, so let's take a look at this thing in 3 dimensions now. We're in the perspective window, and we can kind of rotate around this guy if we use our shift and alternate buttons again. In this case, in the perspective window, we have one additional control. In addition to panning, like this with the middle mouse button, and zooming with the right, we can also tumble around our object by using the left mouse button. Now, the rotation of this might be a little funny when you first start. There's a trick to this. If you click with your shift and your alternate buttons still held down, if you click on any geometry in your view, it'll move the camera's pivot point to that location. So now I can rotate around that pivot point, and it might make it a little easier to get where you need to go. The next step in the video is to copy what we've created here to the other side so that we can create the 2 armrests assemblies. In this program, and with this particular geometry, one side is exactly like the other. So all we need to do really is duplicate this side, but it's a mirror image. Notice that if you go to the front view, that the top armrest part is not aligned with the center of these parts here, and also the lateral support beam on the bottom is on the inside. So if I just copy this thing and I move it over, then it's not going to give me the right result. I actually need to mirror it to get the other side. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to group all of the geometry we've already created together and then mirror it. So here's how you do that. Go to this pick menu, choose pick nothing, pick object, select all of the geometry that you've created for one side, and that's everything we've done so far. And you'll notice one thing that I want to point out here, I'm going to switch to my perspective window so you can see this a little better, is that each object we've created so far has a pivot point. Notice all the green squares in there? They're all representing the individual objects. What I'm going to do to simplify this task a little bit is I'm going to group them together and make them all one object. You can do that by going to the Edit menu and choosing Group. What this does is it takes all of the objects in your scene, groups them together, and puts the pivot point in the middle of your scene, which is at the origin. I've currently got my grid shut off, by the way, if you were wondering, mostly because I didn't need it for this particular exercise. If you do want to see it, then you go to the window display, toggles, and turn on the grid, and then you can see that that's where the origin in your view is. To create the mirror of the original object, what I need to do is go to Edit, Duplicate, Mirror, and then choose the options for mirror. Don't click on the word up mirror, but click on this little box next to it. Those are the options for that tool. In this option window, I'm going to move it up here so you can see, you'll notice that you have the option of duplicating the object or reshaping the object. The duplicate is what we want because we want what we've created. And then we have the option of selecting what plane to mirror across. Notice there are 3 options here: the XY, the YZ, and the XZ. The best way I can describe this is that these axes represent the combination of axes that are a plane. So for instance, the XY, if you put those 2 axes together, it makes a flat 2-dimensional plane. That's your mirror surface. So if we wanted to mirror about the XY, we would choose the XY. If we wanted to mirror about the middle of our scene and put the armrest assembly on the other side, then we wanted mirror about the YZ. So that's the second option here. The XZ would be if we wanted to go across the front. So the YZ is what we want. If you click that option and hit go, it'll put the copy exactly where we need it. And you can check this by going again to either the top view or the front view. And it may be slightly off where our reference image is. It's usually close, but not quite where it should be. Let me be clear on that point. The mirroring is very precise. It's the image that was originally created that wasn't quite centered in our view. It's close, but it's not quite where it needs to be. The next step in the project is to create the supports that go between the two sides of the armrests. In this case, they're all the yellow squares that are visible in this view, and you'll notice in the front view or the top view that they go all the way through to either side. In order to start creating these, I need to go back to my Surfaces menu and choose the Cube tool again. This time I don't have to click and hold on it because it's the first tool available to me there. When I click to place this cube into my scene, remember again, it places it very large to begin with, so you have to scale it, and you can enter 1 for the scale. That's all you have to do is just hit 1 on your keyboard, enter, and it changes the size of it down small enough so that you can see it. We can now manipulate it even further so that it's the correct size. And you'll notice that if I get down small enough, it should sit up right against the existing parts. So in this case, when I'm creating geometry that needs to be against other geometry, I would say that it's a good idea to err on the side of the geometry, not of the reference image. Because if you err on the side of where the reference image is, then the geometry will overlap, and that's a better relationship there than the one for the other parts. Now again, I can use that same object to create the other shapes. They're all exactly the same, but I've only manipulated it in two views, two directions: the Z and the Y. I still need my X. So come over to the front view, choose Scale, and choose your middle mouse button to scale it out to the correct width. That's a little bit further, right about there. And by the way, if you run out of room when you're using your mouse, then you can just simply release, move over, and click and hold again, and then that'll give you a little bit more space. Now I'm ready to copy this object, and again I can use the duplicate tool, but let me show you something kind of cool here. If you go to the edit menu and you go to duplicate object, notice there's also an option button for that one. If I click that option button, it'll bring it in here and it'll allow me to change the number of copies that I'm going to create. So if, for instance, I want to create 4 copies of this object, not just 1, then I can enter 4 here and hit go. And it'll confirm that I want to make sure that I want to create all 4 of those duplicates, and the answer is yes there. Again, all the 4 duplicates are now on top of the original, so in order to pick it, I have to choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object, select on the edge of those cubes there, and pick one of those 5. Again, they're all exactly the same, so it does not matter which one we select. If you want to pick them in order because you're anal, that's fine. But I grab one of them, choose the Move tool, and then drag it straight up. And again, align it as best you can. Precision is not important here. The understanding of how to work these tools is. Once you've got that one moved to where you want it to be, go back to the Pick menu. Choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object, and then go back and select another cube. And I would suggest doing it that way rather than staying on the Move tool, because if I stay on the Move tool and I click here again, but I don't quite click on my object, then it'll move that object that I just placed, I just moved to a different location. So it's sometimes better to just choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object. That way you know what you're picking and what you're moving. Occasionally you can use the Move tool to pick and move. And I don't want to make it seem like it's just going to be impossible the whole way through, but they do give you that ability. In fact, let me try it here. Let's try Cube 15 since I only got 2 left. I'll grab it and I'll move it. And I did that just to demo that it can be done using only the Move tool. You have to be very careful about your selection though. Okay, so now all 5 lateral supports are in place and we're nearly done with this tutorial. In fact, if I turn on my hardware shade by going up to Window Display and choosing Hardware Shade, you can see how these cubes are represented in our view. And you can see that pretty much all we have left to do is the seat bottom and the seat back. And those really don't take very long at all. Let's go ahead and save our file one more time here. Make sure we're getting our progress saved. I would recommend saving very, very frequently. It's extremely frustrating when you've done a lot of work on a project and the program decides to crash or the power goes off or something like that and you lose all your progress. So save it frequently. That'll prevent that from happening. There is also an autosave in Alias, but I would not rely on that. Let's see. Once you've checked that the geometry looks like what you want it to look like, you can go back up to Window Display, go down to Hardware Shade, and shut that off. And let's go in and let's do one new cube again. We could copy the armrest here and move it down and rotate it, but it's really not that hard to create cubes. So let's go down to Surface menu again on the palette. Choose the Cube tool, and for the seat base, I'm just going to click here in the middle, and I'm going to scale it down again. Always got to do that. And then I'm going to rotate it into position and scale it. So I'm still using the scale tool. I'm going to make it flatter. Then I'm going to make it wider. And I'm not sure quite how wide to make it. That looks like it's about right, but let's check it. Rotate it into position. And I'm going to use, again, look at your icon in the corner to determine which axis is correct. The left mouse button in this case is the one we want to rotate around. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's the Z and the Y directions. For the X direction, again, I'm going to go to my front view. And I'm going to scale it. Always make sure you're on the right tool. That's the hardest thing to remember, I think, when you're first getting used to Alias is making sure you've got the right tool selected. With the right tool selected, I'm going to use my middle mouse button to scale it outward. That constrains my movement to just the X. And now it's the correct width. So now we have our seat base. And because the seat back is the same width as the base, as you can see in the front view, I'm going to just simply copy that and move it to create the back. So go to Edit, Duplicate. Now be careful here, because remember the last thing that we duplicated were those supports that go between the two sides. And when I did that, I created 4 copies. So in order to make sure that we don't create 4 copies of the base, we need to go to the Options box and change the number back to 1. Then hit Go. Now we've got 1 copy of our base, not 4. All right, move that object. Move it to wherever you think the middle is approximately. This is really hard to guess and get exactly right, but you can get it kind of close. And then choose your rotate tool, and you can go either way here. Again, it's the left mouse button to rotate, either up or down. It doesn't matter as long as you remember what you did. And I'm trying to get it aligned so that it's perfect on the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to scale it. This time I've lost total track of what direction I need to go, so I really just need to try it out. If I go this direction, it makes it wider. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to use the middle mouse button to go up and down. Now, this one's a little tricky because notice at the bottom that you really can't see where the bottom of the chair ends. And you can't see it in any of the provided views. If I go to my front view here, you can see that if I scroll out, I can't tell because there's a lateral support beam in the way. If I go to the top view, I can't see because the chair base is in the way. The side view, it's covered up by the armrest support. So there's no view where you can tell how long it needs to be. The only thing I can tell you is on the actual chair, this seat back, I believe, screws into the support on the bottom. So if that's the case, then it needs to be about that long and just cover it a little bit. As long as you got the top lined up, then you're doing pretty well. All right, so that's the geometry for our Rietveld chair here. And if I choose to turn on my hardware shade again, I can see that that's the completed chair. Except that it still doesn't look quite right because it's all blue. And if you recall from the sample I showed you at the beginning of this exercise, we had a chair that was colored in. Let me show you how to do that. First step, make sure you save your file. Then we're going to look at the rendering tools. Okay, so when you want to do rendering in your scene, the first step is to go to the render menu at the top, go to the multi-lister options, and choose shaders from the drop-down list there. When you bring up this screen, and let me switch to some bigger icons here so you can see them a little better. You're only given two shaders to begin with. One's called the environment shader, that's all black. And one's called the default shader, which is this blue color we're seeing here. Occasionally, depending on which version of the program you're using, the shader might be represented as a slightly different shade of blue, or might be silver, or might be some other color, like a gray or something. But regardless, it's just a default shader there to help you to get started. What we're going to do is we're going to create our own custom shaders. So I can do that one of two ways. I can copy the default shader and change the color of it, or I can create my own. Both of these options are under the Edit menu. You'll see in there if I click and hold with my left mouse button on the word Edit, that I have the option of copying the existing shader, one that's selected there, highlighted there, or choosing a new shader. Let me show you how to copy one first, then we'll do a new one for the next one. Actually, let's do a new one first, then copy it. That way we'll be able to copy the one we create the way we want it. So choose the new shader. Notice it comes up, it looks exactly like the default shader, so we might as well have copied it. The only difference is that it calls it shader instead of default shader 2. In order to manipulate the shader, I need to double click it. That'll bring up the options for that shader itself. I clicked directly on the sphere to make that change. And let's make a decision about what we want here. In order to create the red-blue chair, we need both red, blue, and black, and yellow. Don't forget the ends of all of the parts of the leg supports and the armrests and everything are yellow. So don't forget that guy. Let's do the blue one first, since we're kind of close to blue to begin with. So that's the shader name at the top. That's the very first thing you can adjust. And notice when you change it here, you also change it in your view here. The next thing is the shading model, and by default it's set to Lambert. If you click this down arrow, you can see that there are the three other options. Phong, which looks like this. It's kind of like a plasticky sort of finish. Blinn, which is a little more like a metal. That's an approximation, but it's more like a metal. And there's also one called light source, which for what we're doing here today is kind of useless. The Lambert, Phong, and Blinn are the three-dimensional shaders. Light sources if you want something to look like it's glowing. So which one is more appropriate for what we're doing? It doesn't really matter. The Phong looks a little more like painted a material or a plastic. So Phong is probably a little better. You could probably also make a case for Blinn depending on the amount of reflectivity that you've got in your object and what you want to show. The great thing is that it really doesn't matter which one you use. All they do is give you options for adjusting certain properties of the light on the object. So you can adjust the diffuse, the gloss, the specular, and all of these other options. I'm going to leave them where they are for now because I don't know what I'm going to get. I need to do a test render before I can make any changes. Under common shader parameters, however, underneath that, you have an option for adjusting the color. And in order to change it, all you need to do is click on the little box that's the color of the shader currently. So click that, and you get multiple options for adjusting it. Notice at the bottom that you can choose an RGB slider. You can also do HSL for hue, saturation, and lightness. HSV, hue, saturation, values. CMYK, I don't know why they truncated the K, but it's CMYK. And RGB. So any color matching is really possible here unless you have like a Pantone shade that you're trying to match. But notice also you have a little color wheel. So if you just want to randomly pick a color, you can go find anything in there and use that shade. That's a pretty awesome color, but we don't really want that one for our blue shader. In fact, if you go back and you look at the file that we had open to begin with, the blue is pretty much a primary color blue. So we can actually use this thing that looks like the Trivial Pursuit piece in the middle here. It's actually a color wheel, but it looks like the Trivial Pursuit piece. And choose the dark blue triangular piece there, the pie piece. That'll be a pretty good approximation of the color that we need for our chair. Notice that anytime we create or select a color, that it places it in this custom color selector box at the top. We can also use our eyedropper tool to select other colors that are, say, in our viewport, and that one's kind of fun to play with. But regardless, this will get us going. All right, so close that box, close this box, and in order to assign it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the part that's the correct color by choosing Pick Nothing, Pick Object, select the base of the chair, that's the only part that's blue, and then with the blue shader selected, make sure it's highlighted, go down to Shading and choose Assign Shader. You have to have both the object you want to assign that shader to and the shader itself selected in order to make this tool work. I've had people do this in the past, and they have one or the other selected, and they can't figure out why it doesn't do what they want it to do. It has to be both. If you don't have both selected, it won't do the right thing. So that's the only part that's blue. The chair back is red, and then everything else is black except for the ends of all of the parts. And those are yellow. So let's create the red part. That one's the next easiest. So in order to do this one, I promised you I'd show you how to copy a shader. So we've got the shader parameters all set up here. Make sure blue is selected and go to Edit, hold it down, and choose Copy. When you do that, it creates blue number 2. So to change blue number 2 to red, double-click it, go back up to the top, change the name first so you can keep track of what's what, call it red. And the Phong shading model is fine. We're going to use the same one because it's the same kind of finish. Go down to where it says color and pick the box. And this time, in the little pie piece area, choose the red one. Close that and close this. Remember what we need to do to be able to assign it. Choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object. It's always a good idea to choose Pick Nothing just to make sure you don't have anything else selected. Then pick the chair back and assign that shader to it. Now, it looks kind of intense, but trust me, it'll look good when we get it done. All right. The next thing we need to do is we need to create the black one and the yellow one. So let's copy it again. Let's call this one, let's do the yellow one first. And then, again, remember, the only thing I need to change is the color. So pick that box, pick the yellow pie piece. And this one's going to be a little trickier to assign. We'll do that in a minute here. Let me create the last shader before I get to that. Let's copy that one more time. And this guy, we're going to change the name to black. And we're going to change the color to black. Now, there's one important thing to know about black in Alias. If I render out a black shader against a black environment, it will be incredibly hard to see. So what I would recommend, actually, is change the black shader from being 100% black, which I'm using the little grayscale sliders in the middle here to pick that color. And instead of choosing the one on the bottom, choose the one directly above it. It's still mostly black, but it's slightly gray, and it'll help it to stand out against the background regardless of what the background is. You also be able to see a little bit more detail in the object itself. If you go any higher than that, it starts looking gray, and that's not what we want. We want it to look black, but that should be pretty good. Okay, so to apply the black shader to our objects here, we can basically put this on everything except the chair base and the chair back. So choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object, and just draw a box around everything. Then I'm going to go in, I'm going to reselect the base and the back. Notice when I do that, it deselects them. And then with the black shader selected in my dialog box here, choose Shading, Assign Shader. That makes everything else except the base and the back black. Now, the last part of this lesson is probably the trickiest part. I usually quiz my students to see if they've been paying attention to some of the ways that Alias works and some of the tricks that are available. But in order to assign the yellow shader, notice, like say for instance, if I want to put it on the ends of the armrest, you can see this in the other views. If you turn the hardware shade off, you can see that it's just on the ends. Notice when I pick it, it picks everything. That's partially because that object is still grouped. So if I go up to Edit and I choose Ungroup, it'll allow me to place the shaders on just one group. Notice I have to deselect the object that's selected and then pick nothing, pick object again, then I can pick the individual object. Now, I still can't pick the individual surfaces here. There's a couple of ways to do this, but the one that I like the best, the one that makes the most sense logically to me, is that if you go up to Edit and ungroup that object again, it'll split the primitive cube up into its individual faces. So now I can go in and I can pick just the end cap. Make sure you get the right one. Again, notice what I did there is when I picked on that corner, or that edge there, sorry, it picked both the front and the top, face B number 5 and face C number 5. So that's that one and this one. In order to see what's what, I can hover over the options there. So in this case, I just deselected it, sorry. So hover over the object that you want, pick it, and then choose the correct shader and assign it. Now you can do that for all of the objects in your scene. And when you get that done, it will look exactly like our view, and we'll go from there. Let me pull up my pre-cooked one here. Because this takes a while to do. And when I turn on the shaded mode here, you can see that I've got the yellow assigned to all of the end caps. I didn't do the ones on the bottom because that wouldn't make any sense. Think about a chair interacting with a dirty floor. You wouldn't want a yellow end cap on the bottom. So, but do make sure you get the backs of the armrests and the ends of all of the support beams. That can be a little tricky to get them all. Don't forget the top of the front legs too. But once you get them all, it should look like this. Now in this one, let's check our shaders here and see what we got. I created all the same shaders. In fact, I even created a couple of extra ones just to mess around with it. But my environment shader is still black. So if I go to render my scene, here's what it's going to look like. Let me go to render. And just do the direct render for the moment. This is a quick one that renders it out your scene. Now notice this one's pretty good. You can see the detail in the chair, so the black's sufficiently light enough, and you can see all of the other parts of the chair. So it's actually not a bad rendering. It's kind of cartoony looking. It's definitely a computer model. There's no chance you'll mistake this for a realistic picture of a Rietveld chair. It's definitely just a computer model. But later on in the term, we're going to show you how to make a realistic looking version of this. There are some things that you can do in Alias to create more realistic renderings, and we'll cover that one in the next step. So, but that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.